I'm Tom Baker, this is Chasing Cars, and this is the new Mercedes-AMG C43. It's down 2 cylinders and a whole litre of displacement compared to the old V6. But because this car actually borrows its engine from the awesome A45 AMG Super Hatch, I have been really looking forward to driving this car. Why? Because if you're a subscriber, you know that I actually quite like the new W206 C-Class. I've got a C200 Edition C long-termer that's an absolute peach so far. So how good can it get with a 300 kilowatt 2-litre engine under the bonnet, whereas my one has a 150 kilowatt 1.5 litre? Well, in today's video, we're going to find out, but it's an interesting question because this car is much more expensive than the segment benchmark, the BMW M340i. Is the new C43 really better than that car? Well, as I was a little disappointed to find out, the driving experience falls short in some key areas with this new 4-cylinder AMG C43. And in today's video, I'm going to explain where those problems are, what Mercedes needs to improve in the future, but also what this car gets very right, because there's a long list of good points too. Before we get started, hit subscribe below. Underneath this long bonnet, which gives away the rear-wheel drive origins of the W206, sits the A45 motor. This is a 2-litre turbocharged inline 4-cylinder engine. When Mercedes launched it in the A45, it was the world's most powerful 4-cylinder, series production 4-cylinder. It's 10 kilowatts down here in the C43, but this is still a 300 kilowatt, 500 Newton meter engine. Of course, it's turned from transverse to longitudinal direction for the C-Class. It's still signed. This one was put together proudly by Marcel Rausch from Volterbach in Germany, and it's a nice looking unit. It slots well into the car here. We've got this very prominent bracing across the top of the engine, and it's a 48 volt mild hybrid. That's going to give you another 10 kilowatts in certain situations, plus a whole heave more torque as well. Gearbox wise, we're running a 9-speed speed shift multi-clutch automatic transmission. But how does it all come together in the real world? Because in the A45, it's quite a unit. In this car, it doesn't come together quite so well. So we love this engine in the A45, but how does it come together in the C43? Well, let's launch it to start with. Sport Plus, foot hard on the brake, on the accelerator, race start. Okay, let's go. It sounds so weird. It sounds like a muffled A45 that's less juvenile, but there's also a slight kind of pumped in spaceship sound for some reason. A bit like what AMG pumps into the cabin of the EQS 53 EV when you launch that thing. I'm just going to dial it back to Sport because Sport Plus is like really aggressive on the throttle and transmission mapping. So look, it's kind of fun to launch this car. It's got all-wheel drive, it's got lots of grip, 69% rear, 31% front, but the numbers are not as good as you might think. It's got 300 kilowatts of power and 500 Newton meters of torque, plus the mild hybrid system, and 9 gears with a speed shift multi-plate clutch, automatic transmission. So it's got lots of bandwidth, and yet it can only do a 4.65 second 0 to 100 time as tested by me, and that was really trying to get it down. The claim is 4.6, so we're not too far off Mercedes' official word on this, and that's just a lot slower than the M340i, which can do it in under 4.1 seconds as tested. And you know, half a second really does count in this segment, particularly when the Beamer is 30 grand cheaper. And you can even negotiate on the BMW, which of course Mercedes doesn't let you do in Australia anymore because they've moved to fixed price. So while there are some big numbers claimed by this powertrain, it just doesn't feel that quick in reality. And that's actually when you're up it for the rent. When you're just pootling around, commuting in comfort mode, it feels like the engine has really been tuned to pass emissions testing, which it almost certainly has. It's quite lethargic, and exactly the point I was just about to make. The transmission in this car is really jerky and lacking polish, particularly compared to the ZF 8-speed that's used in the BMW and a similar torque converter 8-speed that's used by the Audi. The C43's transmission is just complex and highly strung, as is the engine. And that's kind of the danger of when you swap out a nice relaxed 6-pot motor for a theoretically more powerful, but also, you know, highly strung and aggressive, frenetic 4-cylinder, which is precisely what's happened here. It doesn't feel as relaxed or as natural. The whole thing feels more switched on, which is good some of the time, but the car won't relax, which is something that this segment has traditionally been good at, and it needs to be, because with the C-Class, if you want one that's not a C63 but is also a little bit sporty, you've got to go for the C43. And it's just a bit of a shame that it doesn't have a slight additional bit of polish, a bit more of a comfort bias. And that also extends to the suspension, which is adaptive in this car. In comfort mode though, it's quite boaty and with a lot of vertical body motion allowed. In fact, it heaves over undulations at times, which is quite unbecoming of an AMG. So then you put the suspension in sport and it's really quite stiff and brittle even. You look at these wheels and tires, there's barely any tire there, they're very low profile, and that brittle ride is transmitted right up through into the cabin, and all of this plastic and piano black over here, it's already rattling, and this car's only got 3,000 Ks on the clock. As well as these trim rattles which surfaced around the center console's piano black trim when the C43's suspension traversed a hard edge or expansion bump, our red test car also demonstrated some pretty severe creaking of the body around both front doors, confirmed by several Chasing Cars road testers. The issue seemed to be when the body would flex, entering or leaving a driveway or turning into a street with a strange incline. Either way, these sorts of creaks are not what we'd normally expect from a car with only a few thousand kilometers on the clock. And perhaps more importantly, they're baffling given our long-term C200 has almost perfect build quality, plus a supple and buttery suspension. They really do feel like completely different cars. Again, you know, this isn't a comparison, but you get into a 340i and it just has this lush, supple suspension that just feels more appropriate for the kind of car that this is. Because this isn't meant to be a C63. It's not meant to be ultra rigid and stiff. This is meant to be an executive express, a velvet dagger, if you will. And unfortunately, AMG has just missed that brief this time around, and I wonder why that might be. And my personal theory is that Mercedes would be working really hard right now to get their next generation of cars ready, EVs, full EVs, to fully comply with the strict laws that Europe is putting in place. And that to me means that cars like this, a C43, 2 litres, 4-cylinder, it's a stopgap. It's to have an entry-level AMG C-Class on the market until the EV that inevitably replaces this car is ready. And that EV is probably going to be a lot better than this car, because the control surfaces are just not that happy together here. Throttle is doughy and lethargic at times, the transmission is quite jerky, the brakes are very touchy. It's hard to bring the car to a smooth stop. The suspension is overly stiff and heavy in comfort mode. And the steering, well, that's probably the best part, because the engine is lighter than the old V6. So the turn-in is really nice and zealous and enthusiastic. The C43 changes direction very well, and some people will really like the standard for Australia edition of 4-wheel steering, which is quite uncanny. It changes direction so quickly, you have to train yourself to turn the steering wheel a bit less, but that combined with the Michelin Pilot Sport 4S tyres means that traction is awesome, and it's quite hard to break that traction. Even though the all-wheel drive is rear biased, this is not an easy car to slide. By the time it starts sliding, you're carrying an awful lot of speed. So to me, it kind of makes me wonder what the new C63 will be like. It's a similar mechanical package to this with the additional speed and complexity of a plug-in hybrid system. I was looking forward to the C43 because it kind of misses out on that plug-in hybrid complexity, but it doesn't feel like a particularly happy camper to me. And I think if you test drive this car and then you go down the road and you jump into an S4 or an M340i, I think you'll see what I mean. And this isn't necessarily a Mercedes problem, because BMW and Audi could very well go through the same thing when they move to the next generations of emission controls and have to downsize their own petrol engines. But for now, in February 2023, you can still buy one of those rivals for a lot less money with nicer engines and suspensions. That's a simple fact. Now, of course, design and styling are subjective things, but from my perspective, I love the layout of the new W206 interior. It does lose that handy little rotary knob that previous C-Classes had, but if we have to move to a touchscreen, I wish they were all like this one. It's got big wireless Apple CarPlay, big touch targets for the Mercedes stuff, and your key functions are not buried in arcane menus. They're all at your fingertips and nice and easy to use. And this screen over here, which is a big square format display, is kind of tied with this 12-inch digital instrument cluster in front of me as well. And that's nice and clear and customizable and easy to use, though the steering wheel that controls this screen has these really small, finicky spokes with tiny shortcut buttons, which are difficult for even people with excellent eyesight to use. Now, my C-Class, which is an Edition C, it's not an AMG line, it's got a more conventional steering wheel, and I wish you could get that in the AMG versions too. But I love the Manatino switches down here for your drive mode and key performance functions. You can have your loud exhaust button here, you can have your ESC Sport mode button here, you can even have a quick access button to turn off the start-stop, which I know a lot of people will want to do. You can put that right on your steering wheel. Plus you get metal paddles as well. Now seat-wise, these are just a standard seat out of a normal C-Class, which is a bit surprising because that's quite wide. You can kind of roll around in these seats and they don't have adjustable side bolsters, which is a little bit frustrating. And in this car, they're black. And I can tell you, I'm hot right now. It is hot. We're in the sun. The interior of this car really, really heats up. So choosing a lighter color is really advisable. But you can also option in the C63 seats, which are going to give you a lighter seat, both in terms of aesthetics and weight too, which is, you know, something that might be worth considering. Love the leather dash, proper leather up here on the doors, nappa on the steering wheel. So it does feel quite polished and it looks good inside too. But one feature that's missing and that I would have loved to have seen is seat cooling. This car only has seat heating, and cooling the interior down would be that much easier if the seats were ventilated. Last thing I will say though is that the Burmester stereo in this car needs a lot of fine tuning in order to get the fidelity right. It's possible, but out of the box it sounds bad, to be honest. You do have to spend a lot of time picking through the EQ and surround sound settings for your songs to sound as good as they can. Moving to the back seat, while some of the C-Class's platform carried over from the previous gen car, improvements have been made to packaging, and that means rear seat space is better. And you can see that for me, I've got good legroom behind my own driving position, toe room's acceptable, and headroom, well, I've got another inch or two underneath the panoramic split sunroof in this car, so I'm happy. I think you could squeeze someone into the center if you really had to, even though the hump in the floor is pretty big. You've got air vents here, you've got lots of soft materials and that attractive Burmester speaker grille up here on the doors, plus a flip down armrest too. But if you want even more space and more headroom in the back, unfortunately in Australia, you can't go for the C43 wagon. It's not sold here. Another thing that just works for me about the new C-Class is the styling, but especially on the C43, which gets these rather tasty quad pipes and a more aggressive diffuser down below. Now, when we actually kneel down to examine them, they are real in a sense in that they're outlets for a dual exhaust system, but at least they're not closed in like on an Audi SQ5, for instance. Now, the red is also beautiful, plus we've got a power tailgate that pops open quickly to reveal 455 litres of space, not too bad. Underneath the boot floor, you've got a tyre repair kit and a whole bunch of other storage boxes too, which is kind of good, but of course a spare wheel would give you more peace of mind for country touring. You've got a netted area here, you've got hooks and remote releases to drop the rear seats. But where's the wagon? Well, Audi will sell you an S4 Avant. In fact, the wagon is the more popular version of the Audi S4, but Mercedes, sadly, has scrapped all wagons from the C-Class lineup here in Australia. So if you're looking for a more practical vehicle of the same size, sadly, you're going to have to go to an SUV, which is going to reduce the driving dynamics further. When it comes to running costs, the secret shame of downsizing engines, like what has happened here in the AMG C43, is that in the real world, the smaller engine often uses about the same amount of petrol as the bigger unit that it replaced. And that is the case for this car, because the claim isn't that impressive. It's in the 9s. You've got to fill the thing with premium petrol, of course. And in my commuting with the C43, I've been getting about 11 litres per 100 Ks, and that compares to about 9 litres per 100 in my 1.5 litre C200 long-termer. So neither of them are particularly frugal in town. And of course, this thing used to have a 3 litre V6, and for commuting, that vehicle used about 12 litres per 100 Ks. So you can see there's a small decrease, but not enough of a decrease to justify taking away the more desirable engine, in my opinion. You can let me know your views down below. Now, in terms of servicing, Mercedes Australia hasn't yet released its 5-year service price specifically for the C43. But if it follows the rest of the C-Class range, it'll be $5,200 for 5 years and 100,000 Ks of motoring, which is on the more expensive side, but at least it's nice to know what you're going to be up for, and you can prepay that, so it's out of sight, out of mind. In terms of insurance, over the last 12 months, the median budget direct customer spent $1,427 to comprehensively insure a new C-Class. Everybody's situation varies and your premium will vary based on things insurers take into account, like where you live, how you drive the car and your driving history. And lastly, the warranty on the vehicle is 5 years with unlimited kilometers. So, in summing up my thoughts on the new 2023 AMG C43, unfortunately the conclusion is a simple one. This is not AMG's best work as far as the C-Class is concerned. It's effective. 4.65 seconds to 100 is a quick car, no matter how way you cut it. The brakes are good, and the reduced weight over the front end means the handling is better than the previous C43, at least from a turn-in perspective. But a failure to really refine off the edges of this car in terms of its ride quality, its damping, its transmission smoothness, its engine response, the sound, leaves this car, frankly, feeling unfinished. And when its key rivals in the BMW M340i and Audi S4 are polished to such a high degree, and they retain a 6-cylinder engine, and they're much cheaper than this car, the decision for me is simple. You'd buy one of those. And I'm concerned about the C63 because it's this package with even further complexity. So a lot of work is required to get that car as good as it possibly can be. Now, it's not all doom and gloom. We know there are good W206 C-Class specifications. One of them is my long-termer. The C200 is a fabulous car. Of course, it's no AMG. It's not meant to be a sports sedan. So perhaps it's just that the goodness in this generation is at the low end of the range, and that's what's better to buy if what you want is a Mercedes C-Class. Keen to know your views, please let me know down below in the comments. While you're there, hit subscribe, hit the notification bell, and as always, thank you for watching Chasing Cars.